Hello, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. We're really lucky to have two fantastic speakers with us today. We'll start in just a moment. Unfortunately, we're not having a question and answer session today on this webinar, but if you do have any questions throughout the talks, if you pop them in the chat, then we'll be sure to get back to you after the webinar. So yeah, without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Stuart Coleman for the first talk, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
Welcome to this webinar, an introduction to equiculture. If you don't know what that is, you're in good company because I didn't until fairly recently, and hopefully you'll know a lot more about it after this talk. Just to give a little bit of background on myself, I've got a career spanning more than 30 years now in the environmental sector, mainly in nature conservation in both East Anglia and in more recent times, the Southwest region. The last 15 years, I've been in landowner advisory services in Devon and Cornwall, promoting connected landscapes, sustainable land management, and natural resource protection. I'm currently one of several farm advisors for Cornwall Wildlife Trust, which is helping to deliver, amongst other partners, helping to deliver South West Water's funded Upstream thinking project in West Cornwall in drinking water catchments. And myself, I'm mainly working in the upper catchment of the River Cobar, which is a priority watercourse. It is a river intake drinking water supply. It's a drinking water protected area designated, and it's also a nitrate vulnerable zone. And at the bottom of the catchment, we have Low Pool, which is a designated SSSI, large open water body. So we provide, under this project, we provide free and confidential land management advisory services to a range of landowners and land managers, from private small holdings right up to large commercial dairies and everything in between. Our primary focus is water quality improvements through land management and also via farm infrastructure improvements where required. And by its definition, by its name, you might have guessed we're upstream of drinking water intakes. And in my case, it's in a river channel intake, but some of my colleagues work in reservoir intake catchments, and they are subtly different in approach. Our other focus, of course, as you might have guessed by our organisation, is also improvements in wildlife habitats, both existing and newly created habitats or newly restored habitats, natural flood management, robustness of water resources, and that's particularly coming more into vogue with the droughts in recent years. More to come, I'm sure. Improved soil health and structure, for instance, compaction, erosion, soil organic matter, etc. And many other ecosystem services that you would expect to go hand in hand with our work. So some of those improvements are delivered by the use of agri-environment schemes, now moving into the new ELMS schemes, which has been a bit tricky, but we're now getting there by the looks of it. Some also via, we seek other external funding sources where appropriate, and some via voluntary activities by the landowners themselves. Plus, in our case, we also have practical support from a team of volunteers in each of our catchments, which proves really useful. It's a very good step through the door for a lot of landowners, and we get to do the jobs that might be a priority job in our eyes, but isn't a priority job in theirs, and we can get the jobs done, and that works very well. But many of the supportive tools which we as advisors would use for this kind of work, and indeed a lot of the legislative guidance, industry standards, best practice, etc., has traditionally been aimed at commercial farmers. i.e. those that are using bagged and manure nutrient inputs, those who are using agrochemicals, those with heavy machinery, those with livestock, building infrastructure, and also they have a related business income to help them deliver changes where required. Yet, amongst a largely farmed landscape, and certainly where we are, that's approximately 70% of the landscape, there is a scattering of small land ownerships or land rentals, where these are just maybe a single or a few fields, where the primary land management tool is horses. And this sector is increasing in size, not least from a socioeconomic point of view, as farmers are retiring and farming is under the cosh in terms of economically. And maybe those farmers are not being replaced by their children who are choosing to go into other industries and business lines. And so farmland is split up and it's sold off. So at first thought for these holdings to be sold to people with horses. If they've got the money to buy land, they may also have the money to support horses, which are not a cheap option, as I'm sure you'd understand. Holdings compared to the environmental risks related to farms. And yet, there are, in my experience at least, a range of characteristic environmental problems associated with horses. Why, for instance, is there very short grass with very little opportunity for wildlife? Why is that ground compacted with damaged turf and topsoils? Why does the animal presence seem to be for much of the year and indeed in all weathers? And apparently, at first glance, it would appear to be too much grazing pressure on too small an area. Why is manure removed from the system, but externally sourced fodder is brought in? Why are unwanted herbs sprayed off? Why are wormers, intestinal wormers, routinely used, often in far more than they are in livestock? So how can we, as natural resource managers, tackle the negative horse-related issues, which could be runoff problems from compacted ground affecting water quality and indeed flood risk, reduced carbon sequestration potential in impoverished soils, bare fields largely devoid of wildlife interest, heaps of unwanted farmyard manure. From the owner's point of view, a few funding opportunities or sustained land management options via agri-environment schemes to make improvements. You could say low input grassland is an option potential, but then the average height of grass to allow flowering plants is affected and they may be compromised by the presence of horses. Are we, in effect, underestimating the problems? And are we also underestimating the opportunities? How do we engage with horse owners? What can we offer them? Does horse management have to be this way? And then in my case, 2 years ago, something interesting happened. A landowner brought 3 riverside fields, which was approximately 15, 16 acres in the Upper Cobra catchment, on what was formerly, in recent years, intensive silage cut pastures on a dairy business, cattle. That dairy business finished for various reasons and the holding was split up. The fields in question had previously been implicated in runoff pollution problems, manure applications every year on what was really wet ground, riverside ground, cattle having access to streams, runoff issues, etc. But this ground was also strategically placed for natural flood management and habitat restoration potential. The wet ground meant that there was a rushy element. It's in close proximity to County Wildlife Site Moorland Remnant. The adjacent ground and road flooded when water backed up in extreme weather. There was lots of issues. We'd like to help on that piece of ground. Our hearts, however, dropped when Cornwall Wildlife Trust was approached for advice and support by the new landowner. But we found out that the new landowner had multiple horses. And I went, oh, no, a new set of problems. But wait, this landowner, as it turned out, had a plan. She wanted to change the existing ryegrass monocultures into complex, deep-rooted multi-grass and herb lays. She wanted to plant lots of trees as river buffers and also in the longer term for horse browsing fodder. She wanted to plant new hedges to subdivide fields to facilitate rotational regenerative grazing. She didn't want to use herbicides to spray off the weeds, as we don't like calling them, or indeed use toxic wormers. She also wanted to install non-permanent hard standing to provide her horses with foul weather retreat to stop topsoil and grass damage in the winter conditions. And this is a very high rainfall area we're talking about. She wanted loads of wildlife on site. In fact, she wanted most of the things that were on our shopping list. And she said that she was a practitioner in equiculture. Have you heard of it at that time? No, I hadn't. So with collaborative working between ourselves and our project delivery, the services we provide, we began a journey towards significant land restoration and increased knowledge on both our parts. The pastures that she had were removed of fodder, and then they were oversown, drilled with diverse seed mixes, multiple deep-rooted grasses, what you'd call more traditional grasses, and desirable herbs, adding sward complexity and improving the soil condition. We can already see that happening in the first 2 years. And of course, this will in turn improve rainfall infiltration in a very high rainfall area and carbon sequestration with the increased root depth and complexity. No fertilizers and pesticides being applied was already improving soil health. As it turned out, with the help of some of our volunteer teams, we planted nearly 2,500 native trees and hedge shrubs on site in a relatively small area. And this will be increasingly providing a range of agroforestry benefits. Wildlife, especially in my view, insects and birds, have noticeably increased in just 2 years. This already looks nothing like a typical, as I would have known it, a typical horse managed holding. Even the horse behavior, to my untrained eye, seemed to be noticeably different. These were large herbivores which were becoming an integral part of a restoring landscape. The owner and her horses were affecting positive change, and far more than we often manage to achieve on a similar area of farmland, to be fair. So this is a different way to manage horses. And we decided we needed to talk about it to many horse owners and land managers and natural resource managers alike across Cornwall and across the UK. So to you, the audience, this webinar is the first step in the process. We bring you all to facilitate engagement with horse owners who are not our traditional target for sustainable land management advisory services. It is a tool for horse owners to become part of the collective effort to restoring landscapes and reversing environmental damage. And it is a tool to relink horses themselves with their ecosystem, not semi-wild hardy ponies on moors or wetlands as part of a large rewilding project. I'm talking about riding horses. I'm talking about pet horses, the horses down the road that you pat at the farm gate, the ones you didn't think had a role to play. And so, as we've been titled, healthy land, healthy water, healthy horse. These aren't my words, but those of an architect of Equiculture, a sustainable horse management system for the 21st century. And certainly enough from me. It gives me great pleasure to introduce you to the main speaker of our webinar, Stuart Myers. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Stuart, for that wonderful introduction from one Stuart to another. My name's Stuart Myers, along with my wife, Jane. We've been running an organisation called Equiculture for almost 20 years now, long before carbon sequestration became a word in common use. And we focus on looking at the environmental management of horses. We've been unique for a long time in doing this. And it's been a bit of an uphill struggle, but I think the time is right now that we can start to really kick on and start to do some really positive work around the place. So today's talk is about how you can engage with horse owners, understanding a little bit of why horse owners do what they do and why horses do what they do, and I guess hearing a little bit about how we can perhaps help you in the future. So without any further ado, a little bit about ourselves. So my wife Jane's got a master's degree in equine science, specialising in the grazing behaviour of equines. So she did her research at the Royal Dick College in Edinburgh, and then she taught equine science for 7 years at the University of Melbourne. We research and present on the subject of sustainable horsekeeping practices all over the world. So we lived in Australia for many years, we lived here for a while, but we've done webinars in places as far afield as Venezuela, Alaska, Russia, Poland, all around the world pretty much. So we specialise in the subject of the grazing behaviour of horses and how this affects their management, which it kind of seems like a strange way of approaching it. But what we do is we start to understand what the horse is wanting to do. And if we work with that, if we work with the natural processes rather than working against them, suddenly things start to change quite dramatically. So we've run Equiculture for about 20 years, and we've got thousands of followers and advocates worldwide. And in 2012, we awarded a Winston Churchill Fellowship to study environmentally sustainable horsekeeping. And we went to the States and looked at a few things that were happening over there. And again, it wasn't quite what we expected, to be fair. And we are the authors of numerous books on the subject of sustainable horsekeeping, which you can see below there. So we teach horse owners to be responsible and sustainable and ethical. And it's really about getting a sustainable lifestyle for you and your horses. It has to work for both and for the land, otherwise it's going to fail. So for horses, we have to look at how we can improve their lifestyle and their welfare. For people, it's about saving them time and money and work. And for the environment, it's about improving ground cover, biodiversity, soil health, water quality, and creating habitat for wildlife. Because surprisingly enough, horses thrive in a biodiverse environment, both with plants and animals around there. So it's a true win-win-win scenario. So how we started this concept? Well, I mean, our whole journey goes back a long way. I mean, my wife Jane's had horses since she was 8 years of age, and she kept them originally on a riding school / dairy farm in the north of England. But in the mid-90s, we moved to Australia after Jane got a master's degree, and after a little bit of a journey, we bought this beautiful property, 100 acres. Sensational Australian native grasses, which to our untrained eye looked sort of brown and fragile. And if we'd have had lots of money, we'd have ploughed it up, reseeded it, and fertilised it, and the journey would have ended right there and then. But we were determined not to spoil this place. So we're determined to learn as much as we can about how it's working. We're determined to make the horses work for the land rather than against it. We have to remember that in Australia, the conditions are more harsh than England, more extreme. There's huge storms which create floods. There's long periods of droughts. We've got very poor, thin soil, very little topsoil. They've got very fragile native grasses, and there are no native hooved animals. All the animals in Australia, natives, have soft padded feet. So lots of challenges for us to face. So we started to look at the horses and behaviour, challenging existing paradigms and introducing elements of regenerative agriculture and permaculture and lots of other influences, until we eventually developed a system that worked for the land and the horses. We were eventually asked to write a book for CSIRO in Australia, which is the government scientific publishing house. And some of the local natural resource managers got wind of that and asked us to do a few talks. It wasn't a planned journey. We didn't plan on doing this journey whatsoever. We started doing some talks and started working very, very closely with natural resource managers all around Australia, learning from them, sharing ideas, tapping into what they needed, what we needed, what the horses needed, until we sort of honed the situation where we're at now. We did these talks all over Australia, and it's not just a hot, dry climate. There are lots of microclimates around the country. So we've got tropical areas, arid areas, temperate zones, alpine zones, coastal zones. All these areas, we soon realised that no matter where we were, the same core principles applied. The horse is still the horse, still trying to do what the horse wants to do. And if you work with that, suddenly things start to change. We also realised that the same principles would apply virtually anywhere in the world. So if we overgraze, we get erosion. If we overgraze in a dry area, we get dust. If we do it in a wet area, we get mud. It's the same principle, same things that we need to address. Just looking at an Australian perspective, if you like, first of all, the picture on the left, you can see there's a very typical, in fact, it's actually, for most Australian properties, it's actually quite a good property on the left. But you can see big bare areas, very short grass, dry, dusty ground. The same property a year or two later, you can see it's a vastly different picture to the original picture. In the UK, though, very typically what we see in the UK. So on the left again, we've got very overgrazed paddocks, lots of erosion down by the gateways, lots of buttercups around, which in winter turns to this just morass of mud. And again, we'll have seen this time and time and time again. But it doesn't need to be like this. So this same property on the right now looks like this. So a dramatic change just by changing the way we handle the horses, just changing the way the owner thinks, doing a bit more land management, if you like, than horse owners traditionally used to doing. So why is the short grass, and why is the mud, and why is the weeds? It really doesn't have to be this way. There is a more sustainable alternative. And that's what I'm going to touch on this morning. We talk about getting a sustainable equine environment, if you like, for both the horses, the land, and the people. So there are three factors to take into consideration to get into balance. So the environment will look after the soil, the wildlife, the clean water, etc. For the humans, it's about how much money they've got, how much time they've got, how much land they've got, how far from school, from work, etc., etc. And of course, the horses are an important factor in this is too, their health, their behaviour, their welfare, their well-being. And it's about getting the balance right. And if any of these three are not in balance, the whole system crashes down. It cannot be sustainable unless we address all these three elements. But when we do start to address these three elements, we start to get so many positive changes. We address the environment, we get reduced soil loss, healthier soil, more land for wildlife, more carbon sequestration, cleaner water, healthier pasture, more vegetation, and less or no mud or dust. For the humans, it becomes easier to work on there. It saves them time, it saves them money, and they get more quality time to spend with the horses. For the horses, there's less injuries, it's better health. They can exist in an environment that gives them friends, forage freedom, which is the three most important things the horse needs: is companionship, good food, and freedom to move. So therefore, you get better welfare outcomes. It also creates a better image for the horse industry because we lose the mud, we lose the dust, we lose the weeds, we lose the white flappy electric tape. We don't need to do all that again. And we only need to concentrate on two things, and everything else starts to flow from those two things. We start to concentrate on the healthier soil and healthier pasture, and then everything else flows on from there. When we started this journey many, many years ago, we really didn't see how everything was connected. We were really just doing a suck it and see approach to what we're doing. But when you start to look after the soil and the pasture, it's amazing how everything starts to connect, including, as Stuart alluded to earlier on, the horse behaviour. The horses become much more relaxed and laid back about what they're doing. So I guess you need to find out what a horse is, first of all, to understand this thing you're working with. A lot of people think it's just a funny shaped cow, and it's not. It's very, very different to a cow, even though it's the same sort of size and it eats grass. A horse is what's called a monogastric. That's a single-stomached herbivore. So unlike a cow or a sheep and things, they are ruminants, and they've got several chambers in their stomach. A horse has a similar sort of digestive system to ours in that it eats it once it goes through. A cow ingests the food, it takes in a certain volume, it lies down, it regurgitates that food back up again and chews it. And the cow extracts the maximum amount of nutrition out of each mouthful. The horse doesn't do that. It goes in once, passes through the horse, and out the other end. So what, in effect, the horse is not as good at extracting nutrition out of each mouthful. So its survival strategy, how it's evolved, is it actually takes in a greater throughput of fodder than a similar sized cow does. It eats a bigger volume of grasses than the same size of cow because it doesn't extract as much nutrition out of each one. So therefore, what comes out the other end, the manure. This is why rose growers like horse manure over cattle manure, because there's still lots of nutrition in that horse manure. But again, this is a vital part of the ecosystem in taking these nutrients around the landscape. But horse is its survival strategy. It doesn't need to waste time lying down and regurgitating. Instead, it can spend that time going off and finding more food. It can survive in environments that most other herbivores cannot do. It's a wide range of environments it can survive in because it's got this survival strategy, which enables it to increase its grazing behavior from a minimum of 12 hours to a maximum of 20 hours a day. So horses have evolved to be chewing for a minimum of 12 hours a day, but they can push that out to 20 hours if food is scarce. But they are driven almost solely by fibre, particularly in the wild or feral environments. They've evolved to eat low-energy plants over a large range. They're driven in the wild by fibre over nutrition every single time. We've lost that a little bit with our domestic horses, but they are basically fibre processing machines. They've evolved to eat the stuff most of the animals leave behind. The more fibrous, even woodier foodstuffs they source, particularly in winter. And they're also a highly social herd animal. They've evolved to be with other horses. And more, for some reasons, which I won't go into now today, horse owners are starting to separate horses, and that creates anxiety for the horse, and it also puts additional pressures on the land too. I won't go into this too much. I'll go into it more detail with horse owners, but a couple of things that's important for you to understand about the horse. The first thing, it's got a relatively small stomach compared to its overall body size, and acid is continually secreted into it. So it's not designed to have meals. It's designed to have an almost constant throughput of fibre in there. More fibre coming in pushes the existing fibre through the system, so it requires more fibre coming in to push the existing fibre coming out there. So they're not evolved to have meals, and if they have meals, if they go a long time without any fibre in there, the acid doesn't stop, and it literally burns a hole in the stomach wall. Again, without going into too much, the horses are unique. They've actually got two digestive systems going, but I won't go into that today. They're the only animal in the world that has two digestive systems happening at the same time. We'll move on to C, which is actually the cecum, which is the same as our appendix. Horses cannot survive without their cecum. The humans have it removed and they can survive. The cecum is a home for millions and millions of microorganisms, bacteria that are essential for breaking down the cellulose. This is one trigger that you can use for horse owners, because the more biodiverse that the gut biome is, the healthier the horse is, and it gets the biodiversity of the gut biome from the health of the soil. So modern domesticated horses are losing some of that gut biome, and it's created all sorts of health issues. But horse owners don't understand that yet. But it is one of the ins for biodiversity is the more types of food they eat, the more biodiverse their gut biome is, the healthier the horse is afterwards. But even though they graze between 12 and 20 hours a day, they don't graze non-stop, unlike popular opinion. They actually graze in a grazing bout which lasts between 1.5 to 3 hours. And this is an important concept that horse owners don't really understand. It stops when the fibre content indicates the stomach is full, not the nutrition. So they can input as much nutrition as they like, and they continue to be hungry. But a certain amount of fibre for a healthy horse, we can go into eating disorders later, but when a healthy horse has a certain volume of fibre, it then decides to go on to stop eating and go on and do other behaviours. So they eat to fill up and maintain a high gut fill level to keep the whole system moving properly. But when they're not eating, or there's no pasture to eat, it's a muddy or bare paddock, they will simply stand around, sometimes for hours on end. They will also stand around when they're finished a grazing bout. Now, this is a behaviour that currently causes problems. You can see around the gateway, huge erosion issues. But that is a behaviour that we can tap into to help to look after land once we know what we're doing. So they basically need pasture to make them move. And when they're not moving, their favourite spot is by the gate, which is where Meals on Wheels, which is where the owner comes with the supplementary feed. And thus that increases that hanging around behaviour around the gateways. Okay, so we can use this to really benefit once we understand how we can use this behaviour. It also causes this wear and tear pattern. Notice the high wear and tear patterns on these 3 paddocks, identical at each 3 paddocks. And if you're going on Google Earth, you'll see this time and time again. You can see in the centre of the screen there, the 2 little dots are 2 horses there, and they're hanging their closest point to where they can see the meals come from, and the house is down in the bottom left-hand corner. So the meals come from that approach. So they spend all their time as close as they can, so they can then, because they don't want to miss that event for the world. When we told this really smart man, and this man ran a fabulous agricultural college in California, that I could fix this problem in 30 seconds flat, you could almost hear his chin hit the floor. It's a very simple fix once you know how. The grazing characteristics of a horse is horses can eat right down to the ground due to having two sets of incisors. So compared to a cow, the cow uses the tongue and the roof of its mouth to actually pull up longer grass. But the horse has got 2 sets of teeth, incisors, that meet in the middle like a pair of scissors. So there's no grass too short that a horse can't literally vacuum out the ground. They can vacuum fibre up from the shortest of grasses to take it and literally take them up by the roots. So putting a horse in a paddock of short grass does not reduce their intake. And I guess it's a myth amongst the horse world that is what happens. But they've got the ability to vacuum up any morsel of fibre that's in there. But they are really efficient grazers. People sort of complain about the inefficiency of horse grazing, but they are super efficient. They can survive in almost any climate in the world, far better than most other animals. But they didn't evolve to be kept in one place and graze over the same area of grass every day. So therefore, we have to compromise. Now, all horse keeping, unless you've got 10,000 acres, is about compromise. All horse keeping is. But the problem is what most people are doing is making the wrong compromises. What we try and teach people is to make the right compromises, which we need to do, unless we've got 10,000 acres plus, in order to keep our horses. What we want, and what I say we, the natural resource managers out there, what we want is longer, more fibrous grasses. We want longer and healthier root systems. We want healthier soils. We want good ground cover. We want more biodiversity. And ironically, that's what the horses want too. They thrive in a healthy biodiverse environment. They thrive with wildlife around them. They thrive with different plants and bushes and shrubs and things. So we need to educate horse owners on the advantage of these points and challenge the existing common knowledge. We can start to turn things around. And the thing is, once we do engage with some of these horse owners, they get really, really quite excited about coming on this journey. But we've got so many myths to shatter first. So some of the issues that prevent horse owners from adapting these more sustainable practices are traditional practices. You know, these practices have been going for hundreds and hundreds of years. They're enshrined in things like the British Horse Manual, and all these things were designed for people, not horses and not the land. So we have to break the traditional way of thinking about the square postage stamp of a monoculture of grasses is not good for horses. Peer pressure. Who wants to be the first to change when everyone around you is doing all these things? It's a very, very brave person to come and start to change the way they do things. Perceived lack of space facilities, and that's a real common issue in, if you've only got 1 or 2 acres, I haven't got enough space to make change. How can I possibly make change? But it is possible, no matter how small a property you have, to make some positive changes. The lack of knowledge, confidence, you have to be really confident, and it gets harder before it gets easier. So to pursue to play the long game, if you like, often gets very hard for people to think about doing. They get a fear of working with you guys. You're the establishment. You're the organisations. They fear that if they pick up the phone, you come down, you're going to find them having this weed or that weed. It's a real fear that they get. And the good thing about when we work with them, they start to understand that you guys are there to help rather than legislate against. And then even when they do talk to you, they say, well, you don't really understand us. You're used to working with farmers. Our horses do this. We have special horses that do that. Again, it's just about understanding what their needs are. And they become very, very open to working with people such as yourselves. And laminitis equine obesity, it's a huge, very complicated issue that puts the wind up many horse owners. It's really scary. And I can't go into it all today, but I'll just touch on a couple of points so you can understand why it's an issue for horse owners. I'm simplifying it a huge amount, but basically what horses do is they're walking on the fingernail, the middle fingernail all the time. And what laminitis does is it causes the fingernail to swell and to drop off, and then they're walking on very sore, very tender feet, basically, and it becomes a debilitating illness. It really does. It's a huge issue. It's a massive issue in the horse world, and it's growing in momentum all the time. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Very complex. We don't understand all the full causes. There's research going on all around the world, and there's new insights happening every year, but we do not understand all the causes. Lots of half-truths and misinformation. It forces the owner to become very hoof-centric, focusing on just the hoof rather than the horse as a whole and the environment in which it lives in. So it's all about looking after the hoof, which is very important. But if we start to focus on that one thing, we forget how everything else affects that too. There's many, many causes, but the most common cause is linked to obesity and to fructans in grasses. You can see this horse here is not obese, and yet it's still what they call foundering or as a laminitis attack, but it is linked to fructans in grasses as one of the primary causes. And once they have it, it becomes very difficult to manage. So the horse owners' kind of line of thought, what they think about dealing with laminitis is that if it's obesity causing it, the obvious thing is to reduce or eliminate grass intake. If they eat less, they're bound to put on less weight. But this is not true. This doesn't work for a whole range of different reasons. So we keep them on short grass, or in some extreme cases, no grass whatsoever. Grass, I quote on some of the books out there, grass is the enemy, which is ridiculous when horses have evolved to survive mainly on grasses for 10 million years before humans got involved. They think they're going to lose weight, but they don't. Remember, horses have got two incisors that meet in the middle, which are able to eat grass no matter how short it is. So no matter how short that grass is, they actually increase the bite rate and then taking a bigger volume. They don't have to chew it. They don't have saliva. So it actually even though it's counterintuitive, it does not work. And it results in overgrazing. So they keep them on short grass for these very reasons. And in the most extreme cases, the deliberate removal of grass or topsoil, because grass is the enemy. That damages the soil biome. And in the most extreme cases, and this is an extreme case, but this is held up as a good example. But when people follow this, what's called track systems or paddock paradise, is they need to create a bare soil or no grass. So they literally create the bare soil, and I say it just damages the whole soil biome in so many ways. We need to move them away from this. It's becoming taking hold in the UK to a huge extent. So we do cover laminitis, obesity and how it affects land management in our workshops. So we need to educate horse owners about the benefits of longer fibrous pasture and help them create such pasture. We do this by reducing grazing pressure and by allowing the horses to self-regulate carefully. So what we mean by this is that at the moment, horses are being kept on a restrictive diet in many cases. If we suddenly allow them to eat longer pasture, they will gorge. Just like if you're on a diet and suddenly you get the keys to a bakery, you'll eat too much. So we need to go through a process to teach the horses to self-regulate, to reset their whole internal biochemistry. And most horses, when they've been through this process, don't gorge, because fibre, not nutrition, is the driver. This leads to an increase in grass length, soil health, and biodiversity. And it has many benefits to the health of horses. Like I said earlier, it helps the whole gut biome. I probably don't need to talk to you guys about this, but as we understand, but we need to educate the horse owners about the benefits of the rest and rotation on the pasture and soil health. The longer the sward, the healthier the root system, the healthier the soil biome. So the more it's overgrazed, the more the roots die back, the shorter the roots, the more like the ground becomes compacted and unhealthy. So the roots open up the soil, allowing air, water, and nutrients to penetrate. It creates an increase in the health and biodiversity of the soil, microflora and fauna. And this healthy gut biome adds to the health of the horse's gut biome. It's where they get it from. And also, once we teach horse owners about the benefits of rotational grazing, we can talk about things like root pulses, letting the roots grow, then being grazed, the roots die back, puts more and more organic matter into the soil. And rotational grazing increases biodiversity because it gives those plants that are less able to cope with close grazing a chance to thrive and survive, to set seed and multiply. If the horses are in the same paddock every single day, then they will eat out all their favourite plants very quickly. But if they're in for a short space of time and then moved on, then the plants can survive and thrive. In effect, and we've observed, I took a very well-respected Australian botanist into that particular property here. And she was terrified of horses, so she's never been in a paddock with horses, but she was watching them graze. And what they're effectively doing with the bushes and shrubs and herbs and things is that they were going chomp, chomp, chomp on the grasses. They would come to a bush and nibble a couple of the external leaves off these bushes. And effectively, they were pruning the bushes if they're not allowed to overgraze. And she said, her words, "I've never seen such healthy, vigorous looking plants as this, because I've never been in a well-managed horse property before." And that's why they used on many of these regenerative grazing projects, because they do this if they're not allowed to overgraze. But rotational grazing also decreases parasitic worms on your pasture. Again, I won't go into worms just now, but it does actually reduce the worm burden quite significantly. What always amazes me is when you've got farmers who rotate their pastures with the rest of the livestock, and they've got horses too, they don't rotate the horses stay stationary, and then they wonder why the horse paddocks become so trashed. They don't see the difference between the two. But they're not just grazers, they are browsers and foragers too. They eat predominantly grass and also nibble bark, twigs, bushes, berries, herbs and forms, etc. They've even been seen, in extreme cases, to eat a few mouthfuls of carrion. However, in winter, they actually naturally turn to an even more fibrous diet, and branches, twigs, gorse, blackberry, very high fiber plants, because again, breaking down fiber actually generates heat from the inside. So they actually want something that actually takes a lot of fuel to burn and keep them warm from the inside. So we can engage with horse owners in the planting of trees, bushes and hedgerows and living fences to encourage this behaviour. So we can create an opportunity for natural resource managers to engage with horse owners on a beneficial and practical level. As Stuart mentioned earlier on, this is the property in Cornwall where they've planted over 2,500 trees. We also need to encourage horse owners to look after waterways. And perhaps the most beneficial action to benefit the waterways and improve the health of the horse and of the land, and the horses, is to create a healthy biodiverse sward and create healthy riparian zones. The longer sward traps nutrients and prevents runoff. We also need to encourage the growth of more old-fashioned grass species, and not just grass species, pasture species too, and other beneficial plants which don't require fertilizer and are healthy for the horses. And these are the more old-fashioned the species of grass and pasture plants are actually much more beneficial to the horse than our improved species, if you like. But it's also good occasionally to allow horses access to waterways as too, as an occasional graze, occasional pick. But again, their hoof action, the way they graze, actually assists biodiversity happening in these areas. Again, if they don't put too much pressure on the waterways. When we compare it to a farmer, well, sorry, at any given time of year, the grass will either be too long or too short. The land will either be too wet or too dry. The horse is too fat or too thin. So there's these six things that a horse owner has to juggle. A farmer has to juggle these things too, but a farmer has the ability to vary stocking levels. So in a good year, he'll buy more livestock. In a bad year, he'll sell livestock. Horse owners don't do this at all. In many ways, they actually take on more horses in times of stress because they take on rescue horses. So they don't do this. So because they're not going to reduce the grazing pressure over the year, they need something else, some other way of managing the horses. So we introduced a concept of loafing areas, which is, to me, is crucial if you want to manage a property. Somewhere to remove the horses from the land, not a stable. A stable is so negative in many ways, but an area where horses can still wander around, still eat hay, still socialise, but meanwhile taking that pressure off the land when it's too wet or too dry or the grass is too short or too long. And once we introduce this and get the horses used to it, horses will voluntarily spend hours and hours and hours in these loafing areas. You know, up to 40% of their time, if allowed open access to the paddock, they will spend back in the loafing areas if it's set up in the right way. This is a challenge, I guess, to areas like AO and NBs that we do need to, for the greater good, have some areas. It doesn't have to be permanent, where we can remove the horses from the land. And horses are great. They're one of the primary tools in conservation grazing. They are so good at what they do if they don't put too much pressure. So there's a very fine line. One side of the line, they are great at creating biodiversity and regenerating grassland. The other side of the line, they are very harsh on the land. It's about keeping them on the correct side of the land. But they're used extensively around the world for conservation projects because of how they do this. In the talk, we talk about different grazing systems and set stocking, which means that either there's one horse in every paddock, or horses have access to all the land all the time. So you might have 5 acres and all the gates open. Horses can choose where they want to go. Set stocking is the most commonly used system in the horse world, and yet it's the least desirable. Again, like I said earlier, farmers who rotate the rest of their livestock set stock their horses time and time and time again. So we talked to horse owners about using rotational grazing and adding to that things like limited grazing, strip grazing, and cross grazing. So horse owners, who are they? We haven't time again to go into drill too much down into this, but there's 3 distinct groups, and how you approach them and the outcomes you can expect are very, very different. There's the racing industry, very traditional. Horses, and I'm generalizing here, but horses generally are a product. They're there to do a job, which is race, and the properties are there designed to look good and prestigious. There is talk in the racing industry about becoming more green. A lot of that is about recycling and things, but certainly there's an opportunity there to look in. But they're probably the hardest group to approach with what we're doing. The middle group is competitive riders, eventers, and dressage. And again, this varies an awful lot, and some of these merge into the third group as well. Generally, the more competitive they are, the more they're focused on winning, the harder it is to shift their paradigm, because they follow the same management principles, if you like, as the ones who are winning the medals. And so unless we can change them, it's hard to filter down. People are not at the bottom of this group, if you like, who are not that competitive, who do it as a bit of a hobby. They're often more able to get on board, and they sort of fall sort of partially into the third group, which is hobby riders and niche commercial enterprises. Again, you've got to approach all these 3 groups slightly differently, but the hobby riders and niche commercial enterprises, once you get them engaged, are a really positive group to get going. There's a few barriers to break down, like I said earlier, but once we get them engaged, they really are switched on when you start to unlock a few of the barriers for them. We also need to look at manure management, because it happens. Manure does happen. One horse produces about 8 to 10 tons a year, which is an awful lot of organic material to deal with. And like I said earlier, well-fed horses produce higher quality manure than they're not so well fed horses, so it's really nutrient rich and rich in organic material too. Worms, resulting in the overuse of wormers. So as I say, the worming companies made a great marketing strategy years ago, and you must worm your horse every 6 weeks or whatever, and people fell for this. This is exacerbated by the fact that they set stock, and so therefore there's manure in the paddocks all the time, and they have to poo pick and do something with it, and very few of them use it the same way that farmers would use their manure, because of the whole thing and the overuse of the chemical wormers. We do open a dialogue with horse owners around how better management can minimise the use of wormers. We talk about composting and reusing manure and how and why we should encourage dung beetles. And they get so excited by the dung beetles once they start to hear about them. So how can sustainability be achieved? It's not going to happen overnight. I can't give you a magic pill or magic tablet that's going to happen. It's a process we have to go through. We have to play the long game. We have to undo decades of mismanagement. We have to get the horses on board. We have to get the people on board. We have to get the land on board too. So initially, it can become more difficult. But each passing year, it gets easier and easier and easier as both the horses begin to self-regulate. And this is the first year is where people require the most support, because there's a bit of discipline involved, a bit of forward planning, and if we get them through the first year, generally things start to improve quite quickly. We teach them to become grass farmers. Again, it's a little label that they feel proud of, that they no longer live on a horse property, they live on a grass farm, and when they start to encourage the healthiest grasses they can, most biodiverse grass they can, things start to work out positively for them. And we talk about developing a mindset of improvement rather than just maintenance. So at best, most horse properties are just maintaining what they have. We teach them that it's about thinking about how we can improve, even if it's only 5% here, 10% there, and each year it gets better and better and better. So where can you make some improvements? We understand you can't do everything we're going to teach you today, but if you pick out 2 or 3 things you can do, it starts to improve, and we can start to build on that early foundation. And this is where informed compromises are essential. So we developed the Equiculture system, which we call the management system for the 21st century, because horses today are kept very differently and have got very different roles to how they've ever been any time in history. And this system combines the natural and domesticated behaviour of horses with good land management practices, including rotational grazing, and it creates a healthy and sustainable property for the horses, the land, and the wider environment. I haven't time to go into all the nuances about it today, but I'm just letting you know there is a system out there that works. So horses and their owners can be a positive influence on the land. They really can, and once they can be seen as a real healthy custodians of the land once they're shown how to do that. They can be real positive influence. They just need their awareness raised and support during this transition. They thrive in a biodiverse environment, and if well managed, can complement a biodiverse ecosystem. But there are key issues that need addressing. Foremost and potentially the most difficult is the issue of long grass versus more feed versus laminitis. But again, once you're aware of how it all fits together, we can work around that quite effectively. And there is a small but significant shift in the thinking of horse owners looking for a more holistic approach to horse management. We can support that shift, enabling horses once again to become part of the ecosystem and not separate from it. So what we can offer your organisation, if you like, is we do workshops and training days for horse owners. They're generally well attended. They get really quite excited by this. I've just done one in the Isle of Wight last week, and we open a dialogue about biodiversity, about soil health, about maintaining ground cover and protecting waterways. We talk about horse health and welfare, and we talk about a win-win-win scenario, saving the owners time, money and effort, enabling healthy, happy horses, and at the same time promoting a healthy environment. We can do training days for people like yourselves, for natural resource managers and farm advisors, how better equine management affects the soil health, biodiversity, etc. We talk about what is a horse, and just as importantly, what is an owner. We talk about how to get past choke points such as laminitis. We talk about what trigger points you need for engagement, what resources and support the horse owners need. And we run through some of the key points of our horse owners talk that you will need to understand when engaging with horse owners. That's me finished for today. Thank you very, very much for your time. If you need any more information, there's tons of information on our website, which is www.equiculture.net. And if you want to email us, that's absolutely fine. And my wife, Jane, she'll handle emails. It's jane@equiculture.net. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, so Equiculture in Cornwall, the next steps for us. So, I mean, first and foremost, Cornwall Wildlife Trust, through ourselves in the Upstream Thinking Project, we directly experienced the changes brought about by Equiculture on the site in question in the Cobra Catchment. And so we're so impressed, we've chosen to publicly advocate for this method of equine management. We've successfully secured some funding support from Catchment Sensitive Farming, which has in turn secured Stuart Myers his time to deliver 4 public workshops geographically spread across Cornwall, 4 horse owners, several hours each. And these are going to be tailored for the horse owner, as I say, rather than ourselves, although I know some of you do have horses, with a different emphasis on today's webinar. 2 of the workshops will be on the weekend of the 23rd and 24th of March, and another 2 will be on the following weekend, the 30th and the 31st of March. We've also, through the funding, secured Stuart to give us 2 professional land management advisors workshops in the same week. One near Truro, near probably our base at Allet, just outside Truro. If they ever sort out the A30, it'll be a lot easier to get to. Which is on Tuesday, the 26th of March. That's our working date at the moment. And another one probably on somewhere in the Tamar Valley, so we can engage with some of the Devon folks as well. On Thursday, the 28th of March. Again, that's the working date. We will clarify that nearer the time. And again, this is going to be in a lot more detail than today's taster webinar, a lot more detail about engagement and some of the issues involved. Already written, just being proofed and troubleshooted at the moment. We've got in the December, the winter 2023 issue of Cornwall Wildlife Trust's Cornwall magazine. We will have a double-page article on an introduction to equiculture. So in that way, we're reaching out to our 17,000 membership, really trying to get them to understand that the value of horses in our ongoing work to improve the environment and biodiversity in Cornwall, and hopefully generating landowner interest and encouraging attendees to the March workshops. There has already been and will be more engagement with the Cornish and Southwest regional media, both press and radio, to discuss equiculture as a concept, what it means for us, what it means for horse owners, what it means for the environment, and to promote the workshops again, obviously. And we have had some sniffs from Countryfile. They're keeping a watching brief on us, and we're hoping we're going to get some business with them, maybe end up on telly. Hopefully not me, for everybody's benefit. But and finally, there will be, as some of you have asked in the chat, there will be a recorded copy of this webinar. And I'm thinking it's going to be posted on Cornwall Wildlife Trust YouTube page, so you can watch it at your leisure, and you can forward it to those who couldn't attend today. I know some people couldn't attend the presentation today for work reasons. It will be there, so they can see it at their leisure. And please, obviously, forward the link. We will forward the links in the emails via Eventbrite, and please forward it to your colleagues and other contacts who might be interested. And the address for that will be on the feedback from this. And as Stuart suggested, for further information, and certainly we haven't had time to do questions and answer session, put your questions out to us on the chat. There are some, I saw some good questions go through. Stuart and his wife will digest those and try and put together some kind of frequently asked questions feedback, which will be available, am I right in thinking, Stuart, via your webpage or via email? So lastly, I'd like to say thank you very much for attending. I hope it's been useful. I hope it's been stimulating and interesting. I can assure you it's far more interesting to see this happening in the field, literally in the field, and watch change happen remarkably quickly. I'd like to thank Gwen Maggs, who was hosting us today, and she dealt with all the invitations and the Zoom, and apologies for me being very clunky with Zoom and making a pig's ear of it, but hopefully we got by that. And another thank you, and a special thank you for Rick in the background, who was the practitioner who we engaged with, who has been a great inspiration, has transformed her area of Cornwall remarkably quickly, is very dedicated, and beyond that, she also did a lovely job on making our slides look as good as they did, which I'm sure I couldn't have managed. And thank you to her. She couldn't be with us today. She's traveling, but I know she did a lot of work behind the scenes. So thank you to both of those. And that's us. I think we're done. Gwen, if you want to round up, we're there. Thanks very much, everybody.
Hello. Yeah, thank you for everyone who attended. We've got the questions, and we will be, as Stuart has mentioned, sending out some responses to everyone who signed up to the Eventbrite page. So even if you haven't mentioned any questions, we'll still get that out to you. And please do spread the word. It's all open access, so we want you to be able to send this to as many people as you think would be interested, to really get people engaged with sustainable horse management. And yeah, hope you have a good rest of the day. And if you have any questions, please do get in touch with us for any follow-on information or yeah, for any questions you have. Thank you very much. Goodbye.